All right, let's just start with a really direct question, one that comes straight from the text we're digging into today. Do you believe in heaven? Seems like a simple question, right? But believe me, the answer we're about to unpack is, well, it's anything but simple.
See, according to the author of this piece, if you find yourself doubting heaven, if you just can't quite believe it's real, they argue it all boils down to just one single thing.
And what is that one thing? Well, it's selfishness. But we're not just talking about a simple character flaw here. No, the author sees it as something way more insidious. They call it the cancer cell of life's genes.
So, selfishness, the cancer cell of life's genes. That's what we're tackling. Let's really get into this, because it's a pretty powerful and provocative idea. This notion that selfishness is the root of, well, everything. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at this idea of a cancer in our genes. Then, we'll explore the kind of world that selfishness creates. After that, we'll check out the unselfish ideal. Then we'll see how this all leads to building heaven and hell right here on Earth. And we'll finish up with a pretty stark final verdict.
Okay, part 1, a cancer in our genes. Let's really dig into this diagnosis. What does it actually mean to call selfishness a cancer? So the core idea here is that selfishness isn't just an action, it's like a filter on your reality. The author claims it acts like this giant wall, making it impossible for a selfish person to even comprehend pure goodness. Their own self-interest literally blocks the view.
And check out this quote from the text. It puts it so clearly. A selfish person can absolutely not feel or experience the perspective and realm of an unselfish person. Just as someone who has never been hungry cannot feel or experience the taste of hunger. Wow. So it's not just that they disagree, it's that they can't even perceive the other person's reality. It's like trying to explain the color red to someone who's never had sight. It's just a completely different experience.
All right, so that's the diagnosis on an individual level. But how does this cancer affect the world at large? Well, according to the author, if selfishness is the disease, then our entire society is showing the symptoms. And this is a really, really big claim. The text argues that all of it, all the suffering, every conflict, all the ugliness you see out there, it all stems from this one single root cause.
Now, what's fascinating is what gets labeled as selfish. We're not just talking about being greedy. No, according to the author, it's also things like defending your country's interests, or arguing about politics, or disagreeing over religion, even the desire to be yourself or uphold your own truth. Yep, that's on the list. The argument is, anytime you prioritize your own view, your group, or your truth over others, you're feeding the conflict.
Okay, so if selfishness is basically everywhere, is there any hope? Is anyone immune to this cancer? The author says absolutely yes. And they point to some pretty famous examples of people who represent the cure, what they call the unselfish ideal.
And here's who they point to. Figures like Jesus Christ, Buddha Shakyamuni, Lao Tzu, Mother Teresa, even Western missionaries who built schools and hospitals. These are held up as proof that a completely unselfish life is possible. They're presented as people who operated with zero selfish motives, their entire lives dedicated to something bigger than themselves.
And in the text, they're not just called good people. They're called angels and bodhisattvas living right here on Earth. Their special status isn't about performing miracles, you know? It's defined by one thing: their total lack of selfishness.
All right, so this leads to a really crucial point. You've got these two totally opposite ways of being, the selfish and the unselfish. How do these mindsets actually create two different realities?
Well, it's laid out as a pretty direct formula. The more selfish you are, the more the world you create around you looks like hell. And the more unselfish you are, the closer you get to building heaven. It's a binary choice. Your internal state literally builds your external world.
Now, that's a huge idea, but it brings up a pretty obvious question, right? Is there any actual real-world proof of this? I mean, has anyone ever actually created this heaven on Earth?
Funny you should ask. The author offers up one very specific example, a community called Life Shanyuan. They claim this group is, and I'm quoting here, firm and ironclad proof that unselfish people can get together and, well, copy and paste the kingdom of heaven onto Earth.
Okay, that brings us to our final section. And I've got to say, this is where the argument delivers its most uncompromising and maybe its most controversial verdict. And it's all about money.
The text does not beat around the bush. Here's a direct quote. rich person, you will absolutely not be accepted into the kingdom of heaven because the rich person is synonymous with selfishness. Just wow. It's not about how much you give to charity. If you're rich, in this worldview, that's it. You're out.
And here's the reasoning behind that pretty stark claim. It's that the very existence of poor people proves the rich are selfish. The logic goes, if you weren't selfish, how could you possibly hoard wealth while other people are starving? The inequality itself is the proof of the crime, so to speak.
So you end up with these two completely different realms. In the human world, you have both the rich and the poor. It's defined by that gap. But in the kingdom of heaven, according to this text, there are no rich people and there are no poor people. That whole concept just doesn't exist.
And that really brings us to the final takeaway from this whole thing. Unselfishness is held up as the most perfect quality of life, the absolute ideal. And selfishness, well, that's the cancer. It's what eats away at that perfection, until eventually you fall into a hell that you yourself have created. So we're left with this really provocative final question, right? If selfishness really is the cancer cell in our very genes, is absolute, total unselfishness the only cure? It's a world of absolutes, where even a tiny bit of self-interest is seen as a disease. And it makes you wonder, in a world that pretty much runs on individual ambition, is a cure like that even possible?